Hello and welcome to the Path of Kings podcast. I am your host, Josh Pellicer. I'm the creator of the Tao of Badass, and I'm here to teach you how to step into your power and become the king of a man in this life. I'm here with my producer, Johnny Miorca, and today we're going to be talking about why you, as a man, need to study and master war strategy, aka grand strategy, in your life. This is something that is new to me. That is probably about 7 years ago I started to study war strategy. And I got into it mostly because I wanted to understand history and I wanted to essentially take power back in my life, just in general, and learn why power disappears. I wanted to understand the dynamics of power. And this is one of the oldest studies in the world, of course. There's a lot of reasons why. And you can imagine why. Whenever you are in a position where you're being attacked, you have to understand the enemy's motives. You have to understand their mindset, and you have to know them better than they know themselves in a lot of ways. This has grown into and evolved into multiple generations of war strategy and has been an expression of one of the earliest uh, versions of what's eventually became known as grand strategy. And grand strategy is applied in every aspect of life. It's not just in war. It's essentially when you play a very high stakes game in life, no matter what that game is. This is the dynamic and strategy that you use in that game. If you don't, and you're not aware of this strategy, and you don't use strategy like this in that level, when you're operating at that level, then you will fail in general. You will not succeed. And the reason why you don't succeed is because people who want to take you down will take you down. Most people in the world don't see that it's possible for them to actually accomplish great things. So if you start to accomplish great things, they will try to take that from you rather than try to build it up themselves. And this is key for you as a man. You need to understand that as you start to grow and you start to build on your power in your life, you are going to make enemies. Now, these enemies, I hope they're not warranted. I hope that there are people that are just jealous of you and envious of you in general, and they're trying to take you down. And you probably have had experiences like that before, where you have friends or enemies show up in your life and just try to take everything away from you, try to ruin your life in a lot of ways. What do you do in those situations? Well, we're going to go into that today. What you actually should do in these situations and how you can study and master the art of war and apply it to your life. We're also going to go over a few books, which are pretty influential in my life. I think they'll be pretty good for you too. A few authors, and talk about some current events that are going on right now in the world that are relevant for this kind of thing. So about 7 years ago, I had something happen to me. I had a friend who was my best friend at the time who suddenly got really jealous of me. And this has happened to me multiple times in my life, but it hasn't happened in a long, long time before this. This was surprising that it happened. Now, if I could pick a person who would be like the worst person possible to be my enemy, it would have been this guy. I mean, he knew me really, really well. He was brilliant as a warrior. He trained as a warrior. He was in the army. He knew every kind of war tactic you can imagine. And I started looking at warriors. All of a sudden, there's no way that I could match this guy in the direct battlefield of life. And so I stopped thinking about tactics, and I started thinking, well, for a lot of reasons, not just because I never want this to happen again, where I let somebody into my life that they then turn on me and try to ruin my life because of jealousy. I need to also understand that as I start to grow, some of the people that are closest to me will turn on me. And I need to be able to tell the difference between which ones are loyal to me and good people and are just good friends, and which ones are just waiting for their turn as soon as I get big enough in life that they're going to try to take it away from me or tear me down. So I started looking at warriors as masters of tactics, right? You think about a warrior goes out in the battlefield, they're told where to go and what to do, and then they go there and they brilliantly accomplish that goal. But the only thing greater than a warrior is a great general, and a great general of war is focusing almost entirely on strategy. Strategy has a lot of different aspects to it. We're going to go into some of those today. I've got a few books, like I said, I want to mention, but I realized I had to learn strategy in order to keep this from continually happening in my life. So once I started, I realized that I was missing strategy in my life once I started studying it. And this is the reason why, as I started to gain power in my life, I couldn't hold on to it. So I ended up getting this book. This is one of my favorite books of all time here. This is called The 33 Strategies of War. It's a amazing book by Robert Greene, this book. And I don't really like a lot of Robert Greene's books. They're kind of irresponsible in some ways, some of the things that he teaches. However, this book is full of amazing war strategies. I highly recommend you buy a copy of it, get it online, whatever you got to do, and go through it. I've read through it about 3-4 times. I've underlined and dog-eared and multiple different types of pens and pencils underlined over the different times that I've read it. I've consolidated all the things I've learned and read them all again in a notebook. And I don't apply these strategies in general in my life to people that just show up, but I do keep a note in my mind of which people have the tendencies and are positioning themselves. I also learned how to position myself to maintain my power. And as a result of this, I used this in business a few times that I had to, where someone was trying to take my power in business away from me, and it worked flawlessly. I had never had so much power. I never risen so high in my life in success. And I want to share that with you today. So there are a few different things that knowing war strategy will help you with, right? And the first thing I'll mention is that when you start studying war strategy, you begin to recognize the importance of strategic planning in every aspect of your life. Strategic planning is a pain in the ass, I'll be honest. It is where you essentially start to think about every possible outcome and you prepare for these outcomes, and almost none of them happen. So you might prepare for 5 different things and only one of those 5 things happens. And so the other 4 that you prepared for, that you designed out, you don't use that information. You just kind of toss it away, right? So this is the reason why people don't get into strategy, because they get tired. They're tired of always focusing on a bunch of things that don't happen. However, if you don't do this, then you end up having a massive weakness and vulnerability in your life that people will absolutely, at some point, the bigger you get, people will take advantage of you. So you have to be willing to put extra effort into strategy and planning. And remember that most of your plans won't happen. You'll plan for every eventual outcome and every possible outcome you can think of, the most likely outcomes, and most of them won't happen. You just have to be okay with that. That's just the way it's got to be. You have to be all right with the fact that you're going to be planning for shit that won't happen, right? The second is that once you start studying war strategy, you begin to understand the value of anticipating challenges. So you begin to prepare responses in advance, not verbal responses, but mental and action-based responses. And this helps a lot. This is not just in the area of business and in friendships and in loyalty, that kind of thing. It's also very, very much a big part of your responses when it comes to relationships as well. And now you think about, when most people think about preparing responses in advance, they think about rehearsing responses. That's not at all what this is about. In fact, rehearsing responses will backfire on you, where you practice something too much, and then whenever you go to say it in the initial moment when you do, you seem really disingenuous. And I don't think that's a good idea. It's better that you come across as genuine than you come across as powerful, almost all the time, because genuine is trustworthy and powerful without the genuine aspect is not, right? And you'll create a lot more problems in your life. So I wouldn't recommend that you actually rehearse things. However, you can decide, if I do X and this person does Y, then I'll do Z. If they do A, then I'll do B, and that kind of thing. So whenever you take an action, you have a selection of potential reactions that will happen. Think about those things and then go, if this happens, then I'm going to do this. Just make that decision ahead of time. So you'll begin to understand and accept the value of doing that once you start studying war strategy, because you see that split second decision making is what makes all the difference in your life. Next, once you start to study war strategy, you also begin to see the significance of adapting to changes and taking decisive actions in general in your life. And if you don't adapt to the changes, then you're rigid and you end up fighting a war that isn't even happening. You end up in a conflict more often than not where you're taken advantage of by somebody who is much more nimble than you. So you have to, at some point in your life, as you start to build up power and amass this power as a man, which you will be doing as you step into your king, you'll run into all kinds of envy and jealousy. You'll run into people who want to take away what you have. You'll run into people who want to also have what you have. You'll run into people who will straight up just come against you and tell you that they want to take everything from you and make you their enemy. You'll come against people, up against people who will say that they're your friend and they will backstab you. You'll also come against people that want to be there and want to be your friend, but they'll sabotage things for you if you rely on them. So you have to be able to tell the difference between these different types of people, and you have to know how to adapt depending on how they're reacting as well. So having a reactive mindset is generally a bad idea. You don't want to be the one who's taken aback by someone's action. You want to be someone who thinks about the potentials and then takes action generally in the direction you've already planned for. So that's another thing. And then finally, once you start studying war strategy, you begin to grasp the power of leveraging resources and alliances for achieving your goals. This is huge, especially when it comes to business. If you don't understand how to leverage your resources around you and your allies around you, then you won't be able to move power between you and your activities, your actions. And so your actions won't have that power. Only you will have that power, which means that essentially before too long, you will be powerless yourself. So it's important that you grasp the power that is in leveraging resources, the power that is in your allies and your alliances with other people. And alliances are simply mutual benefit. If they get something from your friendship or from your actions in the world, they're more likely to benefit from that. They're more likely to condone you and support you in that way. And you have to know which people do benefit from you, because this is how you run business as well. You can see which people would benefit the most. You can make alliances with those people, and you can achieve your goals as a result of that. Now, I have seen this in my life many times. I've had many past experiences with people who have attempted to take power away from me in different aspects. And I'll tell you one of the stories now. In 2000 and must have been 2008. I was living in New York City. I was a co-owner, and we had too many owners. I think at this time we had 4 owners of this company, of a company called The Art of Charm. The Art of Charm was a business that me and a few of my friends at the time started. It was a dating coach company, and we were doing everything we could to like survive back then. You know, we were trying to stay afloat. I had become this sort of central person for the content around the dating advice that we gave. I was on, I got a Sirius XM radio show. So I was on the radio doing that. We were on TV, you know, Good Morning America, all this crap, and True TV television series. And we had this whole success, right, that was kind of building and welling up. And at one point, one of the guys, and 2 of the guys actually in the company, started getting really jealous of me being in the company. They also just didn't like me as much anymore. I was taking a lot of the spotlight, and they didn't want me to do that. So they started to, behind my back, get other guys in the company and the other members to sort of turn on me. And eventually that happened. They ended up kicking me out of the company. It was a company that I helped to form, and I got nothing for it, right? I got walked away with absolutely nothing. And there I was in New York City without really a dollar to my name. Suddenly all of our housing was paid for by the company. So suddenly I had no place to live in New York. And I had to struggle immediately to try to find a place to live. And this was very, very hard time. I didn't have any income, and I didn't have a place to live suddenly. And they essentially tried to rip the entire rug out from underneath me. So my initial response was to go, okay, well, I'm just going to continue to reach out to my clients and do coaching, right? Just like no big deal. I'll just do the coaching, and those guys can do their own coaching business too. But the students knew that I was the one who came up with all the content, so they'll come to me, you know. And then I noticed that my students started dropping off, and they weren't paying for coaching anymore. I talked to one of them, and it turns out that my old company, some of those people were now contacting the students that I had to tell them that they would give them a really good deal if they would cancel their contracts with me. So now they're stealing my clients, right? And it was my ability to pay for my life, right? They also threatened me with legal action, all this stuff, just to try to stress me out. And it worked. I was stressed out like crazy. In 2008, I didn't know what to do. I called up a friend of mine, and I was at a very, very low point, maybe not a lower point in my life when this happened. And my friend kind of got my head straight. He said, Josh, a a fool with a tool is still a tool. A fool with a tool is still a fool. Maybe I'm the fool in this case, but a fool with a tool is still a fool, right? That means that if you are unaware of how to build something and you steal it from somebody else, this tool that you think will get you what you want, you still don't know how to do it. And so therefore you're not going to use it to such great effect, right? So that kind of made me feel better. But after a while, I ended up leaving New York. I went to LA and they kept attacking me. They attacked me in ways that you wouldn't imagine, trying to delete my email. And someone over there was doing it, whether it was at that company or somewhere else, or someone that just liked those guys and was trying to win their approval over, started to attack me in all these different ways. So finally, I got wise to what was going on. And I said, I need to go underground. And I had to go underground in order to do this. Without anybody knowing, I started writing a book. I finished the book. It was called The Tao of Badass. I contacted all of these different affiliates, people that I knew that were in the dating space. And I said, hey, I have a book. I want you to promote it for me in my launch. Are you open? And I did this secretly because I knew that if I came out and just started asking openly, that these guys would attack me. So I did the whole thing in secret. Finally, I launched and we had a great success with the book. We sold over 500,000 copies of The Tao of Badass, and it became one of the greatest dating books on the market at the time for men. And they couldn't stop me then, right? When they found out that I was doing it, finally, one of them called me and congratulated me on my success. But I never would have made it to the place of success if I hadn't realized that there was an active effort to keep me shut up and push me down. And sometimes you need to be aware when that's happening in your life, because as you rise in power, people will emerge that seek to take it from you and compromise you in every way you can imagine. You will need to learn from the great and powerful men of history, like war generals and kings, in order to anticipate attacks, in order to filter your friends from your foe, and in order to develop an untouchable strategy to keep your power and direct it in an impactful way. Otherwise, others will seek to take your power away from you so that they can direct it in their own lives and put themselves at the center. This happens all the time. People who are really great natured end up doing this if they start to see you rise oftentimes as well. So really, real good, true loyalty is rare in this life. Being able to find and see that and understand loyalty and what creates it is part of what being a leader is. It's part of your process of stepping into your kinghood in your life, being the king of your own life, being able to direct whatever power you can amass in the direction of great impact for the world around you. That's your right as a man and your right as a king if you step into it. So there are a few other things that'll happen that I think that are important, a reason why this is such a big deal, to notice that this impact is part of your destiny. And one of the reasons is because when you start to study this and you start to master it in some kind of way, even if you're just barely mastering it in the beginning, you begin to realize the necessity of discerning loyalty and betrayal among your circle. You start to see that there are people who show up to try to take over. You can look at so many different companies where this happens. I mean, there's so many different companies. Google's a great example. Google used to have a motto that said, "Don't be evil," right? And over time, Google has filtered their search results. They have hidden certain people's responses. They can delete you if they want to so that you can't reach anybody through their platforms. Facebook did the same thing. Of course, they do the same thing now as well. And it's important that you understand that these different entities, they will and can be infiltrated by people. They can, if they don't understand loyalty and what true loyalty is, when you run a really big company, it's very difficult to tell the difference. You have 1,000 things going on. You can be infiltrated by people who are ready and willing to betray you amongst your circle on the inside, and you need to know which is which. You don't need to call them out or destroy them in any kind of way. You just need to not trust them. Or rather, you need to trust them to be who they are and who they show up as, which is someone who is not trustworthy, someone who's not loyal, and who will probably betray you if you give them a chance and you don't protect yourself in that way. Second is you need to accept that the constant need for vigilance as a man and skepticism in guarding your interests. This is a double-edged sword, right? Because as you start to build your power and you start to build up your influence in life, you get more money as well, and you get more leadership, and you have a bigger role to play in the lives of other people. A lot of people are depending on you or relying on you for one reason or another. Then you'll notice that your vigilance around and your skepticism is equal to your success and equal to your ability to see straight. I have a very good friend I just talked to today, awesome guy, one of my best friends in my life. I've had been friends with him for decades. Really, really cool guy, super duper loyal, and amazing friend. And even on our call today, we're doing some work together. On our call today, he said, "I can't get too excited because then I I um I don't I don't think logically or objectively anymore." So he actually curbed himself a little bit from the excitement of working together with me and said, okay, I don't want to get too excited because if I do, then I stop being objective. He knew that about himself. And he knew that saying that to me and then adjusting his excitement level so that he wasn't as excited in that moment, so that he could stay more objective, so that he could make this work out for our interests, was actually the best move to make. Because now I know that he's acting in his own interest. And that's important because sometimes he can act in someone else's interests and it will sabotage his success. So these kinds of things become an active part of your friendships and your allies. You sort of need to express this to your allies. They need to be vigilant as well and almost skeptical, thinking about, okay, well, this is all great and wonderful and I love it and I'd love to do it. And, we need some certain safeguards in place so that it's a win-win-win-win-win all the way around, and it's not just a win for you. Because more often than not, really good loyal people will put the win on you, let you win, and then they won't win anything. And as they do that, they actually sabotage the support system because you need them in order to help whatever it is to work out. You need them as an ally, and if they're not getting anything from it, then it's not going to last for them. So it's very important. And the next thing is that you learn to emulate the resilience and foresight of historical figures in your personal life. And that means that you'll look at people like Napoleon, Karl von Clausewitz, Machiavelli, though he had some pros and cons, Sun Tzu, different figures from history that were amazing war generals or amazing kings in life. And you'll look at these people and you'll say, what did they do? What was their key or crutch to their success? What made it work for them? And then you'll look at that and say, how do I apply that thing that worked for them to my life? There are some aspects of this where you'll ignore. You'll take the best from some people and you'll leave the worst, and you won't do those things because you don't agree with them. And that's how it should be. You should definitely do it that way. However, at the same time, be open-minded. Look at these people and say their circumstances caused them to be this way. You don't have the same circumstances, of course. So don't just look at them and say they did something stupid. I don't want to do that. They were wrong. I would highly recommend you don't dismiss his historical figures that have won in the realm of grand strategy. And you can look at war strategy. You can look at chess, grandmasters of chess, things like that. You can look at the game Go and other games as well, and practice learning grand strategy in those aspects as well. And business is a really common one too. Leadership is another great one. So you do begin to learn the value of the foresight that these historical figures had, how they could see what was coming, and how they could know ahead of time with clarity that they should take actions A, B, or C depending on what to do. One of my favorites was Napoleon. He was such a badass when it came to live adjustment of strategy. He knew how to make an overall strategy that was brilliant, and then he just never stopped adjusting his strategy. I read recently that there's a loop of thinking and acting and adjusting that happens in a dogfight between two planes. And this was in World War II that this was originally found. And they found a formula. Both of the pilots will be doing this sort of loop of thinking where they'll say, okay, what's happening? Adjust my behavior so that I'm adjusting to what's happening, come up with a new plan, implement that plan, notice what happens, adjust my behavior, come up with a new plan, and then implement the plan. And they would do this in a cycle. The pilot that did it the fastest almost always won the dogfight. And this was a life or death, right? You're shooting at a plane or being shot at in the air. and you would die if you messed up. So that sort of loop and doing it faster than everybody else is essentially the core of what power really is. How quickly do you adjust your strategy on the fly? That is major. And if you don't constantly build up your muscle of developing and planning and throwing away the plan when it isn't working, moving on to another plan and not being attached, then you'll be stuck building out a plan you think is going to work. And then as soon as someone adjusts to your plan, it'll take you too long. Your muscle won't be strong enough, and you won't be fast enough to shift your strategy. And again, sometimes it's a blink of an eye difference between you and someone else when it comes to being first to market with a new product, or reaching a group of people or an audience of people with a message. And then finally, you begin to acknowledge the importance of a commanding presence and influence in shaping your destiny. So that means that your presence itself as a whole, your level of influence as a whole, becomes extremely valuable to you and important to you, because it begins to shape your destiny overall in life. Those are my main points about war. I think that this is probably, Johnny, I know that you had some thoughts about this too. That war strategy is one of the greatest. I know we've talked about this before. One of the greatest elements of leadership, and one of the greatest teachers of leadership. I wanted to know if you had any thoughts as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Josh, thank you so much for putting me on to this book, The 33 Strategies of War. I've been learning a lot from reading it. It's really had a profound effect on my life since I've read it. And that first story you told was like really interesting to me. How basically, you started this company, you had business partners, and you co-founded this company, and then they got jealous of you, and then they started taking you down. They started actively, when you left the company, undercutting you. That was that sounded tough, man. And so I guess you were able to maintain your emotions during all that. It sounds like. I
No,
mean,
no,
no,
I wasn't at all. But luckily, I was not face to face with them. Like that was luck in that case. That was the first time I really had to deal with that at such a large level. It took me quite a while to realize that I needed to stop projecting everything that I was thinking and feeling, like we were still on good terms, and like I was still trusting them. So I'm loyal to a fault a lot of the time. I will stay loyal, and I'll just keep trying to give and give and give to people that I like in my life. And that's been the case for me in the past. So with this kind of thing, back then I was really deep in that. So it took me about a year almost to learn that I had to stop projecting my successes out and showing them. I was trying to show them they didn't have to do this anymore. Like I
right.
was a trustworthy person. Like I wasn't the person they thought I was, but they weren't willing to hear that back then. You know.
Wow. Yeah, and it sounds like you were really patient. I mean, it sounds like you were patient in the story. I feel like I would have done the same thing, because like my initial reaction, I feel like putting myself in your shoes wouldn't be to, well, maybe when I was younger, I'd be more reactive, right? But my initial reaction would be to be patient, and it kind of like the same way. Like you founded this company with people that you trust, people that you put your trust in and loyalty to, and you know, I would have been patient, just like how you were, and then but you came out of it and you wrote a new book, and then you were able to succeed from that. Sounded really stressful, man.
Oh, it was heartbreaking. I mean, it was heartbreaking because I couldn't share all my success with them in the first place. I mean, these guys were my best friends for such a long time, and I've had many times in my life that I had my best friends in my life turn into my worst enemies. Like so many times in my life has that happened, and I realized a lot of that was me. Like I was actually showing up, giving too much, making it known that I valued them a lot, and I didn't balance it out by receiving that value from them. I just turned everything back to them and said, "No, you're amazing," you know. And I always thought that that was the way to go. That was like, because I had family. In my family, we did that. But family is, even your family will at times. Some people's families will betray each other at times, and that does happen. From time to time, and depending on your family as well, and your dynamic there. But I was raised to treat everybody that way, And I realized that actually wasn't necessarily the smartest move. I mean, it's it's really beautiful and it's very godlike in a way, right? Very like freeing and sweet and loving and caring and turn the other cheek kind of. But
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways, I was also undermining uh, undermining their natural value. I was starting to give them too much, give them credit for everything. I wasn't taking any of the credit for myself. And at the same time, like I love the idea of giving credit away where credit is due, absolutely. But sometimes it's due to you. And in those moments, if you don't receive it, you can actually make people upset. They can feel like they're trying to give you credit for something you're not receiving, and they'll stop doing it. They'll start taking credit for everything instead. Sometimes, right? So yeah, I wouldn't say I navigated that with poise at all. I was heartbroken by this, and it was really difficult for a long time. But it taught me so much about the nature of people, and also, and not just the psychology of battle dynamics between different power dynamics between different people. It also showed me to the links to which people will go. And I think that if you haven't experienced something like that in your life, that it's actually a very valuable thing to go through. And on one hand, I hope you don't go through it and you never have to deal with it. But on the other hand, if you do have to deal with it, I hope that you really learn everything from the one experience. You don't have to repeat it, because I've had that experience repeat in my life several times, and
Right.
it's only because I didn't learn the lesson as I went through it, and I had to learn it the harder way.
Right. When something like that, you got to like take a second and think about, what happened, and think about, how could you have done it differently? And that's what
Yeah.
I actually kind of was interested in asking you. Like, if you looking back at it now, like, how would you change it up? How would you pick different business partners? Would you vet your business partners more? What would you do?
I always think that I wouldn't change anything because I like it, but that's just a cop out to your question. If I had to really answer your question, what would I really do differently? I guess I'd look back at that and I'd say, all right, you know, um, I'd have to make a deal, right? Like I know where they were powerless and where they had power, and I knew that back then too. I should have then at the time said, look, let's get some things in writing that say that now I'm no longer part of the company. Because if I had done that, then I could say, all right, I'm no longer part of the company, and as a factor of that happening, I didn't know anything about contracts at the time, right? So this was
Mm-hmm.
another thing that was an issue. And if you have access to Chat GPT, you now know everything about contracts. So
Right.
you can totally do a lot with that. But back then we didn't have that. So I could have gotten an official document that they would have been happy to draft me saying, go fuck yourself. And, you're no longer a part of this. And then I could have taken that and said, okay, everything that I brought into the company, I'm taking back with me, unless you're going to pay me for it. Right. And that would have trapped them into a corner where they'd have to say either, no, we're not going to pay you for that. So therefore you can have all that IP that you came to the company with. And then they wouldn't be able to use it themselves without me licensing it to them. Right.
Right.
Or they would have to claim that they weren't doing that at all. Right. And it would be crappy for them. It would be putting them into a situation where they would have to be compromised or they'd have to be honest. Right. And later on, I ended up going to court, not for myself actually, but for somebody else to defend them, who was being attacked by some people. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just they're trying to take everything from these kids. They were two kids, and they were getting sued for $4 million, right? Like,
Wow.
no way they're going to have that kind of money. It was just like ridiculous. They were trying to put them in jail. So
Wow.
I had to come to the courtroom, and I had to go up on the stand and say, look, I know they're claiming that they made all this stuff, that this is all their IP, but here's all the evidence that I created it. And I had to actually do that.
Oh, wow.
And it was because of stuff like that where they were just being dodgy that they ended up losing that, and those two kids got to go free and live their lives. But there's it's pretty rough being betrayed by people, and if I did have to go back, the one thing that I would do differently is I'll be more humble. I would go back and say, hey, look, I realize I must have upset you all. One at a time, I talk to them. I must have upset you. And I'm sorry. Sorry that I upset you. And I know that I'm tough to deal with because I was tough to deal with back then. I was in my 20s. I was a dating coach. I'm like, I had ego up to here, as high as they can go, turned up to 11.
This is
And
before your ego death.
well, even after my ego death, I had a really, just for anybody watching, obviously, I had a very intense experience where I ended up dying, and then I came back to life afterwards. And that physical death was what really did it for me. After that, then I was truly humbled as a man. Now let's go into some classic war strategy concepts here as they apply to your life. One is Sun Tzu's Art of War. This is probably the most popular, if not definitely the most popular war book of all time. And I'm going to go into a few different of the major points that overlap. In the Art of War, strategic planning is massive. It's a big part of this whole thing. Also, of course, not just strategic planning, but the presentation of that planning, the presentation of your power, the concept of always appearing weak when you're strong and appearing strong when you're weak. That kind of perspective. There's so many different war strategies that are being used against you now that if you knew them, you'd be able to resist them. But you don't know them. You're not familiar with them. And because you don't know them, you're not able to go, wait, that person's not my friend. That person is trying to actually take something from me. And the political landscape is probably the greatest landscape where this is happening right now in our lives. Strategic planning is a powerful concept in the art of war, and it outlines the importance of detailed planning and strategy in overcoming your opponents. And this is, again, detailed planning is not necessarily the same as following your detailed plan. You have to plan it in detail to understand where the crux moments are where you should be paying attention. If X happens or Y happens, you need to know right then that that's the important moment. There's a famous story of a warrior in Japan who was being challenged by another warrior, and he was on a boat, or he was about to get on a boat, and he said, "You know what? Why don't we do this? Um, let's get in this boat and let's go to that little island over there in the middle of this river, and we'll get out, and I will beat you without a sword." And the other guy was like, "You're not going to beat me without a sword. You're on, right?" He kept attacking and just challenging him constantly. He said, "Fine, I'll fight you. I won't even use a sword." So he gets there, he paddles out, they get in a boat, they paddle out to this little island. And when he gets to the island, the guy who was challenging him gets out and he's all cocky and he takes his sword and he walks over and he turns around and he's getting prepared to fight. And the other warrior pushes off away from the shore and paddles away and leaves him there on the island. And he beat him without even swinging his sword. And this is a classic story, right? There is always more than one way to fight and win. And oftentimes, in the greatest aspect of the art of war, the greatest strategy is to win without having to fight. You'll see this a lot in life in general, that a lot of different political landscapes and national landscapes and global war landscapes are attempting to win without fighting. Right? They want you to destroy yourself so they don't have to, and then they can come in and be the savior and save you in that moment. Next is you learn to anticipate challenges from Sun Tzu's Art of War. Like you think about it ahead of time. It emphasizes that you know both your enemy and yourself so that you can ensure victory without conflict. Now, it's funny to read a book that talks about the art of war and then have it say the main point of the art of war is to win without conflict. And that's a fascinating concept because the idea of conflict is where you are in direct engagement with and you've shown yourself to your enemy. Now, winning without conflict would mean that you aren't engaged in the fight. You appear to be a bystander. That's a very sneaky way of doing things, right? And however, in the art of war, it was the epitome of war strategies. And that was Sun Tzu's offering to that. Next, he talks about adaptation and decisiveness. This is the other thing that I've been stressing a lot here, that you need to be flexible and responsive to change the circumstances. And then again, he talks also about leveraging your resources. He says that you can use your environment essentially to your advantage, and you choose your battles very wisely during that time, and you'll win. The number one factor in whether or not you win a battle in your life in general is that you get to choose the environment in which it happens. And if you know that environment very well, then you're way more likely to win the battle. And this goes not just for, conflict like this. It goes for all kinds of conflict in your life. So you want to also choose your battles very wisely. You don't want to just take every battle that shows up. That's not a very smart thing to do. You only want to fight against something when you know that the odds are in your favor. If the odds are not in your favor and you're fighting to survive, you need to fight to get them in your favor. You don't need to fight without them being in your favor and then potentially lose, unless you absolutely have to and you have no choice. Next, I'm going to go to I'm going to talk about another person, a very, very controversial character because some of his um, war strategies were very rough. But that was Niccolo Machiavelli. And Machiavelli, the prince, also is had this very interesting way of applying Sun Tzu's ideas to war strategy. He would talk a lot about one of his most famous. He's probably most famous for a war strategy called divide and conquer, the Machiavellian strategy, and that's where you divide your enemy, and then once they are unstable, then you conquer them. Right, as a result. Now, that was probably the roughest strategy, and it would be something that you would use. I don't think you'd ever want to use that strategy in your life. If you can keep from using it, that would be awesome, because that is a pretty rough thing to do. I mean, that's very dishonorable way of acting. However, you should be aware that people do that and will try to do that to you. And you need to know how to respond if someone tries to split you up from a group of people, or make you weaker in that way and cut away your support. And in doing so, you also need to discern. This is one of his greatest lessons, is teaching you to discern loyalty. And he talked about the necessity of being able to distinguish between true and false friends a lot. And Machiavelli knew how to tell the difference between these two different types of people. Also, vigilance and skepticism. He highlights a lot of the importance of being wary of others' intentions and the constant threat of betrayal. There's a lot of threat of betrayal when you get to the place where your power is very, very high in general. And finally, he also talks a lot about um, emulating historical figures. He studied a lot of other uh, of great leaders, and most of the people that you'll read about, including the people I mentioned here, and also like Alexander the Great and others. They study a lot of historic figures in general. So one thing that they all have in common is that they study and understand the great minds of the past warriors, the people that held great positions of power. He also argues, this is Machiavelli again, that there's a significance in his life. He held the significance of being feared and loved by the people. That meant that for him, and again, I don't necessarily agree with this in a personal note, but this was his strategy. His strategy was to create fear and love amongst the people that followed him, so that he could maintain that power and influence. And at the time, that was the most intelligent thing that he could do, considering his circumstances. And then we'll talk a little bit now about somebody who's a little less well known, Karl von Clausewitz. And Clausewitz he wrote a book called On War, it's quoted a lot in the 33 Strategies of War. And he was brilliant as far as a general goes for his time. Now, in today's world, there's 9 different layers of obscurity that the truth is hidden behind so many layers of obscurity. It's hard to even tell what's true and what isn't. And that's part of the deal. It's part of the fight, is to create that kind of confusion and cloud the judgment of people so they can't band together. But Clausewitz was really big on analyzing um, war as an act of policy or diplomacy, meaning that he would be strategical over tactical. So that meant that he would be strategic in general, right? So he would say, I would rather play a game of getting what I need to get 9 different ways, as well, and go at them all at once. And that's my strategy, versus picking one tactic and going for it. He didn't like tactical victories as much as he liked strategic victories. He wanted to win, not just by tactics. He wanted to win by policy and diplomacy and other types of means as well. But don't be confused or mistake this for some higher ethical authority. He did not have a higher ethical authority. He was merely intelligent enough to know that these were some of the greatest strategies that he could use to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. He also was really big on anticipation and preparation. Um, he was big on focusing on the fog of war, something I mentioned earlier. The fog of war is essentially the cloud that can come around the minds of the people who are fighting and trying to protect themselves when there's too many factors to consider at once, which is an aspect of an underdeveloped strategic mind. If you have a strategy, a practice of strategy, then you begin to develop your strategy mind. And as a result, you begin to reach for solutions much faster. And you also can identify which aspects are important and which ones are just the fog of war. You can see through the fog of war and understand the intentions of the enemy. And in general, like I said, you want to understand these so that they're not used against you and you don't know what to do. You have to understand that there are strategies of war that are being used against you in every aspect of your life to take power away that you might have otherwise. And also, he was big on expecting the unexpected in general. He loved to imagine what creative moves others might have to move against him, and just think about that and imagine that that's what they might do, and think about what he might do as well in response. He talks a lot about the dynamic nature of war too, which every great general will, and you need to how you need to have flexible plans in general. And leveraging alliances was massive for him as well, to examine the role of alliances and multiplying forces and achieving objectives. He was much more of a traditional general than many of the other people that I've studied as well. But like I said, I really do recommend that you read the book 33 Strategies of War. This book is killer. An amazing book. I've read it many, many times. And don't consider that you're reading a book about war. Consider you're reading a book about the ways in which people will try to take power from you and have been successful taking power from people in the past. There are many other books on strategy and on war that I would love to share with you. Check out the link in the description if you want to know what we're up to with that kind of thing as well. And yeah, if any closing remarks, John, do you have anything you want to add?
No, it was a great show. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. You know the these lessons that we learned today. I mean, people got to apply them. And make sure to check out our social media so you can find the cool clips. I've been editing these cool clips for the social media: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts.
Check out his clips, y'all. He's working hard for you. Yeah, appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much for checking in, everybody, and we'll see you in the next episode. If you have any comments, questions at all, please feel free to start commenting, and I'll do my best to respond wherever I can and check in with you. And as always, step into your power in this life. You have no choice but to do so. I know that you're stepping into this and you're preparing for it in the first place. You're shooting toward this in your life, that since you know that that's what you want to accomplish, you need to anticipate your success. When you do succeed at that and you start to grow in that way, then you are going to need to understand these kinds of dynamics. And we'll talk about this more in the future. Thanks again. I'm Josh Pellicer from the Path of Kings, and I will see you in the next episode.